Welcome back to Sports Krunch with DKrom, and tonight we have a very special guest for a very special edition. We are proud to have one of the most beautiful minds in the football world, Mr. Benjamin Allbright, join us. Not only is Mr. Allbright a quarterback guru who has his own system of evaluating quarterbacks on film and an analytical freak, and I mean that in a good way, he is also one of the most wired-in reporters on the National Football League beat. He was one of the first to break the stories, if not the first to break the story of the Sam Bradford-Nick Foles trade. And just 2 days ago, he broke the story that said the Broncos and Houston Texans engaged in trade talks involving Peyton Manning, and it was legit, as it was confirmed by CBS Houston and NFL.com had a similar report earlier this month. So this guy is on top of his things inside and out in the National Football League, and we are excited to bring Benjamin Allbright out of the program. How's it going, Ben? Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's going great, brother. I appreciate you having me.
We appreciate you coming as well, and we want to dedicate this show mainly to a topic that it concerns, obviously, Broncos fans and Cowboys fans, but obviously everybody who plays fantasy football, the contract situations of Dez Bryant and Demaryius Thomas, who are both currently under the franchise tag and have until July the 15th to hammer out a long-term contract or be forced to play out the year on the franchise tag. And my first question to you is this, Ben. It was reported just a couple weeks ago by several veteran Broncos beat reporters that it's unlikely that they're going to get a long-term contract done with Demaryius Thomas. And you have been saying that for months, and it took them a while to catch up to you. So my first question to you is, since when were you convinced that it was unlikely the Broncos and Demaryius Thomas were going to come to a long-term agreement, and what specific events or circumstances, if any, convinced you?
Well, several things. I think that part of it had to do with looking at the amount of money that's going to be available to pay other core members of this team. When you look at the contracts coming up with Von Miller coming up shortly, things like that, we definitely had to have the money here to to pay for these things. And Demaryius Thomas is going to command a certain dollar amount. When you look at the way this team has shifted in identity from being a Mike Martz offense from under Adam Gase to the current run-heavy offense under Gary Kubiak, the idea that you need that much money tied up in a wide receiver is simply not there. There's some other things too, some insider stuff. Demaryius and his we'll call it crew were floating some information a while back that potentially they might want to go to New York with the Jets, reunite with Eric Decker, his former teammate and friend, godfather to the child, that kind of thing. And then you've also got the Chan Gailey connection. Chan Gailey is the coach who recruited Demaryius to Georgia Tech in college, and he's now, of course, the offensive coordinator there in New York. So.
Absolutely, I completely agree, and it's kind of like what the New Orleans Saints did earlier this year, because they're shifting more to a run-oriented offense, and they didn't want too much money tied up in Jimmy Graham, so that's why they had no problem T-Lee Kim. That it makes perfect sense, and I completely agree. And now let's move on to the Dez Bryant front. Where do the Cowboys and Dez Bryant stand right now? I know there was a little bit of a pessimistic report from Ian Rappaport a couple weeks ago about them being far apart, but I want to get your take on it. Where do the Cowboys and Dez Bryant stand right now, and how convinced are you that they will come to an agreement by the 15th of July?
By the 15th of July, I'm just not sure. I think they want to come to an agreement. Both sides do. Dez wants max money. They don't really want to pay that because you've got a lot of money tied up in Romo right now. Now, Romo will be coming off the books here in 2 to 3 years, though. He doesn't have that many years left. So he'll be coming off the books. I think they did the smart thing not paying DeMarco Murray. You've got one of the best lines in football, if not the best, in my opinion. I don't think you pay a running back. At this day and age, you don't pay a running back, and you especially don't pay it if you got a line that can get you by. So I think they did the right thing there. Dez is the guy I think you pay, though. Demaryius, I'm not as convinced. Dez is the guy I think you pay. I think Demaryius Thomas is a top 20 wide receiver. I think Dez Bryant is a top 5 wide receiver. So I think you pay him, and I think they will. I just don't know that it gets done here in the next 20 days.
Interesting. And to add on to what you said, I want to tap into that film analyst of yours right now. In your mind, what makes Dez Bryant worthy of that top 5 distinction and not Demaryius Thomas?
Well, Dez Bryant's a more complete receiver. Demaryius Thomas gets slightly overrated because of his size. Demaryius is essentially a 4-route runner. Emmanuel Sanders is the better, more productive, and more complete receiver on that team. Demaryius, because he's so big, they threw a lot of pop screens for him, and because he's so big, the corners simply couldn't tackle him. He broke those and got a lot of yardage out of it. When you really contextualize the numbers, Demaryius had, I want to say he had 40 or 50 more targets on the year than Emmanuel Sanders, but only he had 10 more catches. So his catch percentage was significantly lower. His average depth of target was significantly lower. Emmanuel Sanders averaged, I think, 10% more targets beyond 30 yards down the field, and he also averaged 1.2 more yards per throw, per target. So Emmanuel Sanders was getting significantly more yardage in the grand scheme of things. Now, most of Demaryius's yardage, 600 yards of it or so, came after the catch. Again, that feeds into that pop screen stuff. So Demaryius was essentially a red zone weapon, a pop screen guy, and maybe a slant guy on third down, whereas Emmanuel Sanders was a complete guy, finding the soft spot in the zones vertically, playing in the middle of the field, and picking up necessary yardage. So, again, Dez is a complete guy, though. He's a big guy who's also complete. So I think, like I said, I think you pay him. Demaryius, I think you're a little more cautious with. I think Demaryius is a top 20 receiver. I think he's still a great receiver in the league. I just don't think he's quite where people think he is, putting him in the top 5.
Very interesting take, and that is probably what Broncos front office is thinking as well, because they clearly don't believe he's worth the Calvin Johnson-esque salary, which he is reportedly commanding. And but you said, back to the Dez Bryant negotiations, you said you're uncertain where they're headed right now, and they got 20 days to do so. And if there is no agreement reached between the Cowboys and Dez Bryant by then, do you think Jerry Jones is going to be happy enough with the incoming wide receiver crop that's going to be coming into the NFL via the draft in the next several years to part ways with him? Or do you see it possible, if there's still no agreement after the season with Dez, that he does an unorthodox thing, a thing that's not uncommon, and franchise tags him twice? Which is the more likely outcome?
I think franchise tags him twice. I don't think they let him get out of Dallas unless he forces his way out. I can't see them letting him out of Dallas.
That would be an interesting scenario to develop as well. Hopefully the Cowboys and Dez reach that agreement by the 15th to avoid more drama like that in the future. And it's obviously also has been reported that Dez Bryant, as he confirmed himself to Michael Silver of NFL Network, that it's a legit threat that he is going to miss a regular season game or two if no deal is struck by July 15th. In your mind, how likely is it that a holdout by either Dez Bryant and or Demaryius Thomas, such a holdout will result in missed regular season games?
0.0%. These guys get paid. They get paid 16 times a year. That's on game day. They get game checks. They don't get weekly checks throughout the year. So these salaries are game checks that are divided out, over the number of games they played. And the problem with the new collective bargaining agreement is it totally ruined the idea that a holdout gave you leverage, and people haven't caught on to that yet. Holding out only costs you money at this point. It doesn't give you leverage against a team unless the team could absolutely not function without you. So a holdout would only work if you're a quarterback. If you're Aaron Rodgers holding out, they're going to get it done. If you're Jordy Nelson holding out, they're going to wait for you to come back and get hungry.
Indeed. And we've breezed through all I wanted to cover, but there is one final question before we wrap things up here. This is sort of a variation on the Demaryius Thomas situation. Like once it became more of a consensus amongst your colleagues in the media that it would be unlikely for the Broncos and Demaryius Thomas to reach a long-term deal, some Broncos fans took to Twitter and said that they had fears that this is an emerging pattern of John Elway lowballing potential Broncos free agents, and they also sort of fear that that behavior towards Demaryius is going to make other free agents hesitant to come to Denver in the future. And one guy also tweeted that he thought that Shane Ray was drafted to replace Von Miller, and he sees Von Miller going out of town. Are those concerns justified or not?
I think there's some truth to that, but I wouldn't say those concerns necessarily are justified. If you look at the New England Patriots model over the last 15, 20 years, it's also been to basically lowball players. And people, when you build a winning culture, people will take that. People will accept that. I think the Broncos have built that. The Broncos have been to 6 Super Bowls in the last 30 years and only had 5 losing seasons. So I think there's a winning culture there. Do I think that there's some concern that's legit there? Yes, absolutely. I know John Elway to be a shrewd businessman. I know he's trying to get the best bang for the buck for the organization. I know that to be true. I also realize that with modern analytics, you don't tie up that much money in the receiving position. So you don't want to sit there and tie up 15% of your cap in a wide receiver. It's just not, that's not something that Super Bowl winning teams do. When you look at the Shane Ray situation, was he drafted to replace Von Miller? No. He was drafted to replace DeMarcus Ware. But when you look at the leverage that he gives, if in contract talks, well, then yes, they're absolutely going to use that. They're going to say, hey, Von, well, if you want to go, we got our next guy right here who could replace you. So they're going to use that as leverage. That's smart. But the reality is he was drafted. They're going to try to pay Von, and they drafted him really to replace DeMarcus Ware here, who's probably only got a year or 2 left in him.
Yes, indeed. And based on right now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it that Von Miller is out of Denver in 2017, assuming he gets franchise tagged in 2016 and doesn't reach a deal?
You say how likely is it that he leaves?
Yes.
I would say very low, a 1 or a 2. They're going to try to pay him.
Yes, indeed. Because also, wouldn't you say, like you mentioned the stat about wide receivers tying up like 10, 50% of your cap at a wide receiver is not a recipe for winning a Super Bowl, as those stats say, and pass rusher is a different breed. Is that correct?
Absolutely. There's 4 positions that you pay in the NFL, and that's passers, pass catchers, pass rushers, and pass protectors. And those are the big money positions in the modern NFL. So that's who you pay.
Yes, indeed. And thank you once again, Ben, for coming on the show and giving us your scoopage and your updates on those scenarios between Demaryius Thomas and Dez Bryant and situations Cowboys fans, Broncos fans, and football fans everywhere will definitely be paying attention to these next 20 days or so. And before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to promote yourself and to explain briefly what your work is and where people can find you on the internet, television, radio, etc.
Well, if you're Denver local, you can find me on Mile High Sports, Mile High Sports Radio, and the Mile High Sports Magazine. If you, in terms of the internet itself, you can follow me on Twitter at Allbright NFL, but it's a train wreck, and I really wouldn't recommend it. So there's that. And various publications across the internet. I'm starting up a new venture with cover32.com to work on their draft section, I think, for the coming year. Look, we're going to be finalizing that, I think, here in the next week.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. I definitely look forward to reading your draft analysis and hopefully speaking with you about these potential prospects in 2016 in the near future. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'll tell all my friends to keep an eye out for your stuff. You're the real deal, man. You know your stuff, from whether it's rumblings and news around the NFL to analytics. You know it all. You're the man, Ben, and we are extremely grateful for your time this evening. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you for having me. Anytime, brother. My
pleasure. Benjamin Allbright, ladies and gentlemen. And that does it for tonight's special edition of Sports Krunch with DKrom. And tomorrow night, Luke Polglaze of ProFootballSpot.com will join me to break down the AFC West. Thank you very much, and have a good night, everybody.